Wonderful. Erev Tov and Chodesh Tov to everyone. Rolly and I are really excited to launch this series, and Maris Krause, who's our senior administrator for the Center for Prayer and Spirituality here. And it's a really special new class that we're starting tonight, which is Torah for Our Time, which allows us to reconnect with really special teachers that we've been graced with over the last 25 years, which is really incredible, and particularly special this evening to have Rabbi Alex Braver with us, who was a BJ Fellow from 2013 to 2016. Rabbi Alex is the Associate Rabbi at Congregation Tiferet Israel in Columbus, Ohio. I keep on saying Cleveland when I announce it. Columbus, Ohio. And welcome everyone here who's from Congregation Tiferet Israel as well. We're really happy to be in this learning with you. He loves teaching and coordinating Jewish learning, working with kids and young families, and accompanying people in both joyful and difficult moments. He lives with his husband, Alex Weisler, their son, Ezra, who's being put to bed now, which is why Alex has headphones on, and their dog, Benji. Alex enjoys Jewish mysticism and mindfulness, vegetarian junk food, and nerdy science fiction. And I just want to say on Rolly and my behalf, one of the gifts of having the fellowship has been to be deeply touched by those who come through our doors and teach Torah and learn Torah. And Alex's Torah was always deeply genuine and filled with chesed and honesty. And so it's beautiful to welcome you back to this home from your home in Columbus and to hear your Torah tonight. A big warm welcome from all of us.
Thank you. Wow, that was very special. And I will say, it's a huge honor and a really joyful and beautiful thing for me to be able to be virtually back and to be, it's been 2013, so like almost 10 years since I first began the fellowship, and to return to the place as a teacher again, even virtually, to the place that shaped me so profoundly and that gave me so much of my Torah and turned me into the rabbi that I am is just very, very special. And then on top of that, thanks to the magic of technology, that I get to bring my own community in. And as I look at the 106 screens, which is crazy, but to look at these 106 screens and to see faces that I know and love from BJ and faces that I know and love from my community at Tiferet Israel, all sort of, right next to each other. It's just, what a schutz, what a joy and a merit it is for me. So thanks to everybody for being here, to my teachers, to my congregants, to my friends. Thank you so much. I will say, BJ was really one of the first places that I really had an in-depth experience with Jewish mindfulness as a lived practice. And it's something that really infused the tefillah, whether it was the specifically sort of mindfulness focused services or just sort of an attitude that was brought to the davening just on a regular Shabbat morning for Pesukei de Zimra or singing in Nigun, the intentionality brought to the teachings. And I sort of felt there, and it's something I try to bring to my own rabbinate, that there's nothing that is just done for the sake of doing it. It's not just like, oh, well, I guess it's Pesach, so we should eat some matzah. It's like, no, there's like a reason for this. There's something here. There's something that really is worth doing. And that's a gift that we, can give to you. And that's Jewish mindfulness. I think that's as much Jewish mindfulness as meditation. And that it was alive in a way at BJ that I am always sort of trying to bring into my work. There's sort of, I think, two ways to think about Jewish mindfulness and to teach Jewish mindfulness. One is experiential. And again, I was lucky enough a few years ago to go to Costa Rica with Marcelo, again, one of my Rebbes, to sort of learn it in practice and to chant and to do movement and do mindful eating. And it was an incredible experience. And then I will say that as deeply as I was affected by that, the other side of Jewish mindfulness is the sort of the roots and the texts and the history and the intricate sort of drashot from the Jewish mystical masters that require, I think, more of there's a higher barrier for entry to them, because these guys, you know, and they're mostly guys, unfortunately, but they assumed that you knew Tanakh. Of course you knew Tanakh. You memorized Tanakh, you know, when you were a kid, and you knew Talmud, and you knew the Zohar, and you knew all this stuff. And so, you know, they could just, you know, throw it all together and you would know what they're talking about. And I think, you know, partly just because it's my inclination and partly just because I love this stuff. I also really love to dive not only into the practice, but into the underpinnings of Jewish mysticism, and to show that mysticism is not just something that's sort of bolted onto Judaism, like, oh, well, you're doing Judaism, but you know, mindfulness is popular now. So let's do a little meditating, and then we can go have our matzah, right? You know, and I think that's sort of a cynical point of view. But I think that this really emerges from the depths of the tradition, and to give people access to that requires some delving into some text. So if I apologize if this was a bait and switch, if you thought we were going to be meditating for the next hour, but really we're going to be doing text study. So sorry, I tricked you, but I hope you will stay along for the ride and enjoy it with me. So my goal is going to, oh, actually one more thing, a preface, which is what I'm doing now, which is to walk through a Hasidic text with you, is something I literally began to do at BJ. When I was at BJ, I taught a class in the evening called Sparks. And you remember, but anyone here in Sparks? Raise your hand if you were in the Sparks class now, almost 10 years ago. If you even remember. Oh, there, hi, I see a few people, right? Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so Sparks met, first of all, we met in the Ansonia building before you even had the community house. I don't remember the Ansonia building. That was great. And we really, like, you know, every week for an hour and a half would go through a very challenging Hasidic text, and I would do my best, you know, to walk us through it. So that's a skill I've been trying to hone and work on, and it's, again, really a pleasure to be able to do it again with you guys. So I sort of have two goals in walking through the text. One goal is to take you through the moves and the creative, interpretive sort of strategies that the Rebbe that we're going to be studying is doing, so you understand what he's saying. And that means looking at the sources he's citing, understanding how he weaves them together, seeing the Hebrew puns he's making, all that stuff. And number two is to say that what we're studying is not just something theoretical and not just something textual and not just something like some mystic dreamed up, but to try and sort of link it to our actual lives. So that when he says some crazy mystical thing or some crazy thing, we can say, oh, you know, this is a way that mindfulness can live in our lives. And these are things that we've experienced or we've tried to experience. So those are my goals. I want to open up by asking, and you can either, you can raise your hand or you can type this into the chat, because I think this will sort of get the creative juices flowing. How has your experience of mindfulness changed or been affected in the last 2 years of the pandemic? How have you found those moments of mindfulness or spirituality or of connection? How have you not found them? How have you been challenged to do it? How has it gotten better? How has it gotten worse? You think about it, you can type it in the chat, you can throw it in, you can raise your hand, and if somebody wants to share, I can take it. You know, I'll say that for me, it was really a double whammy of my son was born about 6 months before the pandemic. So I already had that big change of my mindfulness life, which was very severely changed. And then the pandemic, you know, and everything was on Zoom, and trying to find those ways to connect. It was just a very different game. Beth, would you like to share a little bit?
Laila Tov, Alex.
Laila Tov.
For me, I've had a long-standing meditation practice, and for me, spending so much time by myself has given me an opportunity to really quiet down. You know, I'm not spending time driving places in my car like I used to be. And I find that I'm meditating in different places in my house. I have a practice now of sitting in my living room and breathing while I watch the sun come up. It's really enriched my meditation practice enormously. By the same token, I've been incredibly lonely. But in terms of just what's happening for me internally, it's really been a blessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see a few other folks saying, that their practice got deeper, Carl. I see this line that it was life-saving and renewing, which is amazing. For better or for worse, I realized that most things are not under my control. That's a lesson I return to over and over again. Again, one of those parenting lessons of a toddler. You realize, oh well, there's a lot that's not under my control. The early pandemic forced me to have less to do and more time to be. Amazing. And I think, in my own life, I had both. I had moments of like, oh, I don't have to drive around to 17 places. I can just zoom in, zoom out, and then I have more time. And I can be at home and I can sort of soak up my family and soak up my time with my son, with my husband. And then there were times where I felt like my whole spiritual life is on Zoom and I'd rather die than stare at a screen for one more second. And why am I doing this? And I'm the rabbi. So if I'm feeling that, so I think it's really a profoundly mixed bag. But I'm really glad to see that so many folks here, got a lot out of it. And that it provided the sort of silver lining, as Amy, hi Amy, the silver lining that reminded us of the interconnectedness of us all. Beautiful. All right, we'll do one last little comment from Karen, and then I'm going to jump into some text.
So for me, being so far away from everybody and being isolated basically from everybody, as soon as I got on Zoom and was able to talk with people, it's like it created 50 new friends for me and relationships that we went through this really tough time together. And it's like a super special relationship that you don't experience with anybody else. And it's just such a tight bond and friendships that just really saw me through.
Wow.
It's just been wonderful.
Yeah.
And I got to meet new rabbis. So that was when I met you. So just a blessing all around for me.
Thank you. For those who don't know, Karen is the Tiferet Israel West Coast representative from San Francisco, our satellite synagogue on Zoom. So, it's interesting that, I think the way that we talk about mindfulness and think about mindfulness, and most of the answers have been, this is something that I'm going to sort of all there's stuff in my life sort of like crowds in on me, and I need to find a way to sort of like tell it to stop, sit over here and close my eyes, right? And sort of like have that experience. And I think one of the most beautiful insights of the Hasidic mystics and of this strain of Jewish mindfulness is the way that they hope we can integrate mindfulness not only into a discrete spiritual practice that we do, from 7 to 8 a.m. or whatever, but into everything. And that's sort of going to be the theme that we're going to get to in this text. So, all right, for those who would rather just sort of look at the source sheet on your own, I'm going to put the link in the chat. And for those who would rather look at my share screen, I'm going to, don't go anywhere. Pull up my sheet. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So the only problem with sharing screen is that I can't always see everyone's faces. So I will rely on you to not be shy. I know that people at Tiferet are not shy, and I'm pretty sure it's been a little while, but people at BJ are not shy either. So I hope you will jump in when appropriate. Okay. So one other programming note about how we're going to proceed. It's a lot of setup, I know, but basically how I like to do this, and this is something I learned at BJ when I first started teaching this class, is the Hasidic masters who write these drashot assume all the sources they're citing. So we have to do our homework first because we don't know all the sources. So we have to spend a little bit of time looking at all the pieces of the puzzle they're going to put together so that we understand it in its context. And then when we read the drash in a few minutes, we'll be able to say, oh, wow, what a great use of that verse from Exodus, right? So that's sort of the plan, okay? All right. Let's see. We're going to start with this source from Exodus. This is from this week's Parsha. Is there someone who would like to read? I may, let's see, in smaller groups, I just call out people, but I'm going to ask, let's see, maybe someone from Tiferet that I know won't be offended if I ask them to read. Marilyn, would you want to read? Just because I see your Zoom box. No? There you are.
So where am I starting? Where it says Exodus 25?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay. The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, tell the Israelite people to make me gifts. You shall accept gifts from me from every person whose heart so moves them. 3, and there are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper.
You can just keep reading. You don't have to do the numbers. You can just keep going.
Okay, good. Blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood. Oil for the lighting, spices for the anointing. Oh, I can't talk. Anointing. Oil and for the aromatic incense. Lapis lazuli. Lazuli, okay, and other stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of its furnishings. So shall you make it.
Great, thank you. This is a hard section. So first of all, I'm going to preempt any questions by saying dolphin skins. No one really knows if they're dolphin skins. It's sort of an odd Hebrew word, the translation of which we're not really sure about. I don't really think it was dolphin skins, because where do they get the dolphins? But some sort of animal skins. And that could be a whole other hour-long class about whatever that animal is, the tachash. So this is the building of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan. And curious, what do you notice about the construction here? What's interesting to you about the focus of the Torah? Again, this is the Torah saying, this is how you're going to pray, right? The Israelites just been freed and they've got the 10 Commandments and whatever. Now it's like, okay, like this is your first sort of task as a people. This is how I want you to worship, how to pray, how to have spiritual experience. And the focus is a bunch of stuff. It's very physical. It's the yarn, it's the gold, it's the silver, it's the oil, it's right. It's very embodied, very physical. The focus of the drash, though, of what we're going to be looking at in this fundament is this line right here. So what he's going to pick up on is kind of the oddness of this language. First is to take me gifts. Let me ask you something. If I take something from you, is it a gift? No, right? So the locution is an odd one. The chu li truma, take gifts from me, right? You would expect, go get the gifts from me, have the people give me gifts, but to take gifts from me is kind of a strange thing. The other sort of oddness that we're gonna explore is the word for gift, which is truma. Truma comes from the word, the root or verb for leharim, meaning to lift up. And truma has a sort of double meaning. It can mean just sort of a general gift, or it can mean, as we're going to see in a little bit, specifically gifts that the Israelites would set aside from their yearly produce for the priests, for the Kohanim, right? So it sort of has a double meaning. And that choice of that word here is kind of an odd and interesting one, right? That's really all we need to know right now. With me so far? Let me get a thumbs up. Good? Okay, all right. Let's see. The next source he's going to cite is from Rashi on the word truma, on gifts, something set apart. Let them set apart a gift for me from their possessions. So what Rashi is sort of picking up on is, again, the oddness of the word to take, and the strangeness of this word truma to say, the essence of this gift again, because you can ask the question, what does God need gifts for, right? This is, but the idea is that their willingness to separate out something that is theirs, to be set apart, to be separated or differentiated, is the core practice that's being asked for here, right? Still with me? Okay, these are our building blocks. Next, this is from Haggai, from one of the later prophets. For thus said the Eternal of hosts, in just a little while longer, I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, and the precious things of all the nations shall come here, and I will fill this house, meaning the temple, with glory, said the Eternal of hosts. Silver is mine, says the Eternal. Silver is mine and gold is mine, says the Eternal of hosts. So what do you think the main idea is here? Sort of in its context, this vision is of sort of all the nations that oppressed the Israelites sort of getting their comeuppance, and that all of their wealth and all of their whatever will spill back into the temple, because all silver, all gold, all property belongs to God. What we're going to see how it gets used in a few minutes in the drasha is to say, I think the question that we probably all ask when we look at the Mishkan, which is if God is God and silver is God's and gold is God's, what need or what use does God have for any of this silver or gold that we're making this Mishkan out of, right? And again, so many of you sort of talked about in find our own spiritual fulfillment set places, because we could only be in our homes. And so this focus on the place, right, on the Mishkan is just, I think in 2022 sort of strikes a little more difficult. Okay. Oh wow, it's already 7:24. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump. This source is not super important right now. To jump down to, we talked about the Truma. The Truma, you can look at this if you want to sort of go deeper into Truma, but there's different types of Truma, different types of sort of taxes or gifts that were given to the priests and to the Levi'im. They would take different percentages of their incomes and give them to the priestly class. And some of it would, in certain years, would go to the poor. There's a whole sort of taxation system that involves people, again, just like Rashi says, separating out your gifts, also separating out some of their income every year to go to the temple or to go to the poor. All right, we're almost done with the building blocks. So you're still with me? Okay, good. All right. One more piece about Truma. How much Truma should you give? Meaning, if there's not a baseline requirement of how much of this gift of your income you should give to the priest, what should you do? This is the appropriate amount of Truma. This is from the Mishnah. So this is about 1,800 years old from the rabbis. A generous person gives 1 in 40. The House of Shammai says 1 in 30. I don't know what percentage is 1 in 40. Anyone have a quick calculator on them? But 1 in 40, 1/40th of your income should go to temple. The average person would give 1 in 50, which I guess is 2%, right? And the stingy person gives 1/60. So that's sort of, again, is like a bit of a preview of like how much money do they expect to be giving every year. And we're going to see how that gets used in an interesting way. Hold on to this idea of 1 in 60, because we're going to explore it later in a minute. Okay? All right. I'm getting anxious and I want to jump to the real text. So I'm going to skip a little bit of the background sources because, I like to get to the fun stuff. Okay. Tell the Israelite people to take me gifts. This is the drash from the Sfat Emet. So the Sfat Emet, 19th century Hasidic master of the Ger Hasidim. What's fascinating about him, so I assume a number of you have studied from him. I think Felicia teaches from the Sfat Emet quite regularly. Is that right? So I'm sure there's some devotees from her class. The Sfat Emet, what makes him incredibly fascinating, in addition to just being a creative, interesting, insightful, mindful thinker, is that when you buy his sefer, his book, it's organized by parsha and by year. So you can read every sermon he gave about Parshat Truma from 1874 to 1903 or whatever, right? And you can sort of see over the course of the years the development of his thought. You can see how he recycles ideas, how he rethinks ideas. It's really a very cool thing to do. So this is the Sfanamet. Tell the Israelite people. Oh, and someone asked about tithing, right? So this is related to the idea of tithing, right? Of taking 10%. And there's a whole sort of, for another evening, the most exciting evening learning of all is biblical tax systems. Who would want to? Anyone want to do an hour and a half lesson on tithing and biblical taxes? I don't. But there's a whole intricate system of how the ancient Israelites were expected to contribute to the temple, and how some of those contributions would go to the priests, some would go to the Levites, some would go to the poor, depending on the year and all these other things. So this is all related to this idea of tithing. Okay. The text is difficult since it ought to have said, give me, right? We talked about this before. Take gifts. You don't take a gift, you give a gift. Rashi explains, as we saw before, a gift is something that is set apart. Let them set apart a gift for me from their possessions. Okay, so far we've seen these sources. We know what he's getting at. And for him who's giving this sermon, Chumash and Rashi, meaning the text and the Rashi, that's what you learn when you're a kid, right? So this is like simple stuff. Now we're going into the deep. It seems that this aspect, that a person sets apart something of theirs, setting it aside for God, may God be blessed, is more important to God than the giving itself, since silver is mine and gold is mine, says the eternal of hosts. What does this line mean to you? I think this is sort of one of the core ideas he's getting at. Person sets apart something that is theirs, setting it aside for God. That is more important to God than the giving itself, since silver is mine and gold is mine, says the Lord. Type it in the chat. You can raise your hand.
I would say, this is Pam.
Hi, Pam.
That the silver and gold are inanimate objects that God created and don't really change much since they're created. But a person grows and is, has a free will. So anything that's freely given to God would be more valuable to God from a person, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Again, these inanimate objects, again, it's, if God is Malokul Haaretz Kivodo, that God fills the whole earth, what does God need of one more thing? I'm seeing in the chats very similar ideas, right? Giving yourself rather than giving a thing, sacrificing something of value to them. Exactly. There's this text I remember from the Netivot Shalom, who's a later Hasidic master. I think I may have actually used this on the high holidays at BJ one year. So this is, if you were paying attention in 2014, that he talks about sacrifice, which is slightly different, but similar sacrifice. And he uses a parable, and he says, it's like when a child gives a gift to their parent. The parent doesn't need the gift. They don't, again, Ezra does, Ezra says, look, a leaf, right? My son, look, I found he's 2.5. So I found a leaf on the floor, right? And it's not about the leaf. I don't need a leaf, right? But because my son saw something that brought him wonder and then showed it to me and gave it to me, that's a gift that is the dearest thing of all, So I think this is sort of the idea we're getting at here, the willingness to set aside something for a higher purpose. And whether you want to use sort of like theological language of setting aside for God, or maybe more mindful language of sort of dedicating something to a mindful purpose or to a spiritual purpose or to something that is more meaningful, that's the core, right? That's what Vaikuli Truma, the separating out. And to go back to what many of you shared, so much of, I think, your pandemic experience that you shared was the ability to separate out time, to separate out moments and spaces, and to dedicate them to something sacred rather than scrolling on your, I'm sure I separated out plenty of time to scroll on my phone, but when I dedicate that time to something worthwhile, it's really precious, really special. Okay. Realizing that I'm looking at a few of the comments in the chat. God reminding us that we don't own everything. Beautiful. Always remembering we have something to give. I love that. Again, even, my son, giving the leaf, he doesn't, it's something he has to give. And that impulse to give is a really core spiritual idea of not only being a taker, but being a giver, creating an intimate, meaningful relationship between a person and God. And that willingness to give of your own thing is I think, a big part of that. Beautiful. A person's generosity and letting go of something that they care about for God's sake, may God be blessed, is called taking. Through this act of taking, one lifts up the mitromem. You can see what I do here when I translate it is I capitalize the root, the Hebrew root, so you can see what the pun he's making. So, right, resh mem mem, exactly. Mitromem, one lifts up or lifts themselves up and lifts up this generosity to God. It is called a truma, right? Again, the word for gift, truma, has the same root or related root to mitromem. So take me gifts, he's sort of retranslating it not as take me gifts, but separate away something from yourself that you're willing to give and then lift it up to its source, right? That's his, I think if he had to write a translation of the verse, that's what he would do so far, right? As in the verse, who has ascended to heaven and come down? So, you know, this idea and this is, I think, part of the act of translating these texts into a modern mindfulness lens is that Jewish texts tend to focus on the vertical metaphor, you know, lifting up. We can also read this as an in versus out metaphor, right? I think it just for people in that period, it was easier to think about, you know, upward as the right direction, but I think we tend to think about it as inward. Only through human generosity that has been lifted up to God, may God be blessed. So what is it that helps to bring us up to this new level? There's something about generosity, about giving, about separating, about seeing what we have and being willing to part with some of it, that can help us achieve a different sort of spiritual depth. With me? Anyone think of any examples of that? Because again, you know, part of the goal is to parse the text and to parse the language he's using, but you know, can giving be a method of mindfulness? Is there a way that you give, that you separate, that you are generous, and that you find something deeper in it? You know, I'll say that you know, I think about my relationships and my friendships, and that part of the giving, it's not always things, although things are a really lovely way to access someone and to be willing to, you know, give them something fun, but also to give of yourself and to sort of open yourself up and make yourself vulnerable and be willing to entrust someone with something a little touchy or a little vulnerable or a little deep about yourself. That's a gift that can really open up something deeper. Giving something that is meaningful to another, and that can mean your time, is a mindful gift. Beautiful. Right, having kavanah, having intention. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Let's see. Anything on the footnotes that I wanted to share? I think so. Oh, right, this idea of generosity. So one more comment. Giving a gift requires that you think of the one you are giving to and consider their needs and desires. Right. Great. Even just, again, the thought that someone thought of you. So one last thing just to say is that the focus on generosity is linked to one of the following verses in the Parsha, right? That the gift would be taken from each and every person whose heart so moved them. Asher yidvenu libo. So nedava, nedivut, yidvenu. He's not just taking generosity out of nowhere, but he's taking this idea of generosity from the Parsha itself, that God wanted these gifts to be separated and taken from people who had a generous heart, right? Asher yidvenu libo. Really, I guess you would translate it, whose heart was made generous, or whose heart, it's a verb, it's like whose heart acted generously. So this idea of spiritual generosity, I think is a core idea that he's trying to play with. Okay. Now, we're going into the taxation stuff. So hang in there with me. It's taught in the Talmud, in Beitzah and other places, that truma can be separated by one's intent alone. Since by means of good thoughts and intentions, one can separate and lift it up to the heavens. So what does this whole thing mean? there's the technical level, and then there's the spiritual level that he's going to be bringing them to. On a technical level, in this source in the Talmud is saying when you want to make a donation of truma to the temple, when you're ready to make your contribution to the temple, even having the intention of setting it aside is enough to change its status to something sacred for the temple, right? Meaning you don't have to actually give it over yet. Even the separating it out in your intentions, even saying, oh, you know what, like tomorrow I'm going to take this basket of apples from my tree to the temple as a donation. You know, tomorrow I'm going to take 2 out of my 20 cows as an offering. Even just that intention is enough to separate it out and to give it a special status. You can see, as Carl was saying about intention, about kavanah, that he takes this legalistic principle about intention is enough to change something's status, to say actually our intentions can lift up anything. It's not only the actions. Again, actions are important. Action is important. Mitzvot are important. Doing things is important. But intention and that inner direction that we want to apply to any action, anything we're doing, that's enough to elevate it. And when we have that perspective, we can elevate anything that we're doing. With me still? Okay, well, we're gonna try and ground this in a minute. But this mitzvah is to be practiced with everything, so that a portion of it is for God. May God be blessed. This is I think the root of this drash and where he's going to take it. This idea of separating out something for a sacred purpose in the Talmud and in halachic Jewish legal literature is about a very specific thing, about separating out your donations for the temple, right? Your kol nidre appeal, whatever, right? What he's saying is, we can take our intentionality, our mindfulness, our kavanah, and we can apply it to everything, not just donations, and also not just mitzvot, not just when I'm praying, not just when I'm taking a class and listening to a rabbi, not just when I'm meditating, everything. Really, everything we do. If we take him seriously, we take his language here, bechol davar, right, with everything, meaning when you are walking down the street, can you make your walk something that is dedicated to something more sacred? When you're, I don't know who's going to the grocery store anymore and who's doing delivery still, but right, when you're in line at the grocery store, you're doing the self-checkout. I can go off on a whole, stand-up routine about how much I hate self-checkout, but right, you're doing the self-checkout, and can you find a way to sort of say, like, this is something that I'm doing with a mindful purpose? And just as an example of this, I'm not claiming I do this, but could I say, thank God that I have income to buy food, that I have the time to go get food at this place, that I can provide my family with food, that I can cook something delicious for my son, for my, who am I kidding? Alex cooks, I don't really cook, but right, but I can provide the food, right, for our family, and with each swipe. So just to say, bechol davar, with everything you do, with every interaction you have, it's theoretically possible to lift it up as an offering to God, or it's theoretically possible to make it a mindful experience. Meaning you don't have to go to Costa Rica. I would recommend it highly because Costa Rica is awesome and Marcelo is awesome, but you don't have to do it in Costa Rica. You can do it anywhere. It's harder to do anywhere. In Costa Rica, it's easier because you're removed from your life. Again, that aspect of separating out, you separate yourself away. You're in the world's most gorgeous place. You're seeing the birds eating from the bird feeder. You're having silent mornings. It's more conducive to that, where and that I think was one of the few times in my life where I really felt like every bite of my breakfast felt like something I could lift up, right? Because it was just in an atmosphere that made it really doable. Nowadays, it's like I shove down my cereal bar while my son is, in his high chair, and I run off to Minion, and right. But again, could I go back to that place, and could we all? And the what I meant sort of take is like, yeah, we could, and we really could. Bechol davar, not just in our ritual lives, not just in our spiritual lives. Not saying it's easy, but it's doable. And this, I think, is that idea expressed in a really clever and novel way. So I think, most people who know and have read this parsha, I think someone even quoted this earlier on, Ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, right? And you even probably at BJ, we sing this more often than at Tiferet, but, Ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, right? It's a beautiful melody. Let them make me a sanctuary. And there's sort of like three levels of meaning here, right? The pshat, meaning the sort of like literal meaning of the text, is let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Like, if you make me the sanctuary, I, God, can dwell in the sanctuary in the middle of the people, right? The more common drash on this is v'shachanti betocham. If you make me a sanctuary through your work of building a sacred space, I, God, can dwell among the people. Not only in the sanctuary, but I will literally dwell among them. I'll be part of your community, meaning you have a community that is focused on a sacred center. This is the teaching I got from Felicia. If you have a community that's focused on a sacred center, the Mishkan, this place where God's presence can dwell, and everyone contributes to it, then that presence doesn't only dwell in that place, it dwells among everyone who's a part of it. But Sfat Emet takes it to a new place that I had never heard until I discovered this text, which is, and I will even admit that only in preparing for tonight did I realize I had misread this because I was so used to reading it the other way. So I was very glad that I had this opportunity to teach. Hu bechol ma'aseh ha'adam. That is, make me a sanctuary in every human deed. In every human deed. Meaning the sanctuary is not the tabernacle. The sanctuary is not even in the hearts of people. The sanctuary is in every action, every deed that you do, every mitzvah you do, every action you take, every interaction you have. Each of those verbs, each of those deeds is its own sanctuary, its own mikdash. And each of those actions is a dwelling place for God, or a dwelling place for deeper meaning, or for mindfulness, or for connection, or however you want to translate that. It's like, I can't remember the name of the theologian who talks about, God is a verb. Anyone ever heard that? Right? Meaning God is not, a big sky man who looks down on us and punishes us. God is sort of present in the way in which we interact with people. And this is a really beautiful expression of that. Every deed we do can become a sanctuary. And I think that it's a challenge to think about our lives in a different way. For me, certainly it's a challenge to think about my life in a different way. Mary Daly, thank you. Judith Plaskow, another theologian. Amazing. Nice to see you in the text. I only see a couple faces on my screen, so I didn't get to see that Judith was here. All right, let's keep going. It is taught in Mishnah Trumot. So you remember this little piece that we looked at a few minutes ago. This is the appropriate amount of Trumah. So we're going back to the Mishnah about 1800 years ago or so, give or take. And they're talking about, again, that taxation method and how much should you give if there's no set amount. A generous person gives 1 in 40. Someone earlier gave the percentage. It was like 1.5% or 2.5% or something. Is that right? The average person, 1 in 50, just 2%. And a stingy person is 1 in 60. For 500 bonus points, does anyone know the significance of 1 in 60, 1/60th in Jewish thought, in Jewish sources? Yes, Pam, go ahead.
It's the amount that determines whether or not something has become treif or not. If you drop like the 60th something into your soup,
Yes, exactly. I also, so you get 500 points, but also Bob Cantor typed it in the chat at the same time. So you're going to divide up the 500 points among the two of you. Is that okay? All right. You can meet him later and you can redeem those points for another source sheet. So this idea of 1 in 60 is, the idea is if I'm cooking my my fleischig soup, making chicken soup, and from my upper shelf, a little tiny piece of Parmesan falls into my soup. And I go, oh no, there's milk and meat. My whole soup is ruined. I was cooking this soup for 500 people coming over to my house and a little bit of milk dropped into my meat dish. Oh my God, I have to start all over. I'm going to be bankrupt. And the principle here is, if the amount of trace substance or whatever that gets into it is less than 1/60th of the total volume, it doesn't matter. It's as if it wasn't there, right? You can't intentionally put, 1/60th little bit of bacon bits in your thing, on purpose. But if it's an accident, basically the idea is that the taste is lost. The other answer for this question, by the way, is that there's a section in Brachot in the Talmud that talks about things that are 1/60th of other things, and a few of the examples I remember off the top of my head. So Nora put one of them in here. Someone who visits a person who is ill takes away 1/60th of their suffering, right? Meaning a little tiny bit that is like just barely enough to be perceptible, but almost not, right? Rabbis also say that sleep is 1/60th of death, and they say that Shabbat is 1/60th of Olam Haba, right? So 1/60th is like the tiniest taste, right? That could be a whole other class too. Wow, this is like good material. I should be thinking about other classes. So 1/60th. So a stingy person is giving really just the tiniest taste of their income, right? Anything that is intended for God, may God be blessed, should be at least 1/60th. Less than that, and it could be nullified by an outside intention, right? So this is that same idea. So taking the idea from kashrut, again, if my one little piece of Parmesan cheese falls into my soup, it's as if it's nullified. So we're taking that and saying, what, in every action, in everything we do, we want to have, at least 1/60th of intentionality, of meaning, of connection in all of our deeds. I'm seeing it in the chat. If you are feeding a starving poor person and a pig falls into the food, it becomes kosher. Huh, I have to think about that. Well, the other thing is that, if someone is starving, you can eat whatever you want. I mean, it's all out the window when someone's life is in jeopardy. But this idea, this really clever little idea is that 1/60th, one tiny taste of everything we do can have its sort of mindful, spiritual little sliver, right? It's gift, it's truma, it's little tax that we take out of it. And I was so struck by this because, again, the difference between, Costa Rica and pandemic life with a toddler is a profound difference. And it's much harder for me now to be able to really block off that full experience of deep mindfulness. But can I invest 1/60th into each action, right? Into even my time, wiping up dirty diapers and all the other logistics of life, and even when he's screaming and even when I'm rushing from event to event, whatever, can I still find that 1/60th of intention? And that's, I think, a more sustainable way to reflect on mindfulness. Meaning, again, Costa Rica and retreats and all these things, these are really important because they give us a big taste of it. They give us more than 1/60th. They let us sort of really experience a full-on bite. But when you go home, if you lose more than one, if you're down to less than 1/60th, you've lost that taste. So when I think about a Jewish experience of mindfulness, it's both having those sort of big, powerful moments, the high holidays and retreats and all these things that really push us to deepen our connection. And then it's the everyday. And this is a very deep principle in Jewish thought and Jewish spirituality. Judaism almost uniform, I'm sure there's exceptions with a 3,000-year-old tradition, but almost uniformly, the rabbis, the sages, they're married, they have families, they're engaged in communal life. They're not separating themselves from the community. They're not going into seclusion for their whole careers. And I understand the appeal of that because, again, to be able to live in a cloistered way would be really special, and to be able to have that time. But the rabbis are really deeply engaged in communal life and in adjudicating. It's like these rabbis that we read about in the Talmud. 1 second they're these beautiful insights. Every deed of a human being is a temple for God, and then they're like, Rabbi, what happens if some cheese fell in my soup? or Rabbi, my ox gored his ox. What do I do now, right? All the real sort of nitty gritty things of life that I think in our culture we think about as not religious or not spiritual. And that's part of our spiritual tradition, all of that nitty gritty stuff. And the way that we make it part of it is to invest that 1/60th, right? To link it to something that's more special, often just through our kavanah, through our intention, often through a bracha, through a blessing. When I talk to people who are thinking about converting to Judaism or exploring more deeply, saying blessings before we eat, saying a quick one-line blessing, a quick and easy way to invest that little 1/60th into the act of eating an apple or whatever it is you're doing. I'm seeing, okay, so in the chat, if you scrape your knuckles, 1/60th of the quantity is still okay, right, yeah. The gematria of 60, so the gematria of 60 is the letter samech, I think is 60. I have to think more about, I don't really know, I'm not such a gematria person. I do know that it's the letter samech though. And Karen cites this great story, right? The story of Shimon Bar Yochai and his son who have to flee from Roman persecution, and they go and they live in a cave for 7 years in isolation. And all they do in the cave is they study Torah and they daven and they eat from a fig tree that grows in the cave and they drink from a stream that flows in the cave. And after 7 years of this monastic life, they come back out and they see that people are just living their lives. It's like they've been living this like intense, scary, deep, spiritual sort of thing in this cave. And then like they see people just like waltzing around, going to Kroger or whatever. There's not really Kroger in New York. Kroger is a Midwestern supermarket chain for our Manhattanites. Going to West End Market, West Side Market, and it's been a while since I went to West Side Market, right? And they have a total meltdown, and it says that his eyes ignite anything he sees, whether that's metaphorical or literal is another matter, but he can't, right? So to be rooted and grounded in real life is really, really important. And that's the path of Jewish mysticism, is to always maintain that connection, because it's something that's for everybody, not just for people who can separate themselves out. Rather, 1/60th should be protected, leaving aside a place upon which the heavenly name may fall. Through this, the entire deed is lifted up. Right, and this I think is such a beautiful insight too, that you can't give 100% all the time. You just can't. You can't live every moment spiritually, mindfully. It's impossible. But if you can dedicate a little bit, that little 1/60th, it lifts up the entire thing. It transforms the entire thing. So this is a really hard practice to do, because just in our lives, we get distracted, we get busy, I get it. But I really feel that this is a push and a call for me to try and live up to this in my own life. And I hope you feel the same way. So then he quotes the end of the verse. From every person whose heart so moves him, meaning from, and this is Asher Yidvenu Libo, from every person whose heart acts generously, I should probably retranslate it, meaning from every type of generous intention that exists in the human heart, one should set apart a gift, right? Every impulse of generosity, every sort of impulse of kindness that we have, we should find a way to take a little chunk of it and use it to elevate the whole deed. What do you think? You with me? You like it? You dislike it? I see Beth. Great. Go ahead.
Okay, enough of that.
I like the 1/60th idea a lot. When especially in yoga classes, I've taught when I'm trying to lead people into meditation, I can't tell you the number of times people have said to me, I can't meditate, because they're imagining some complete cessation of the mind, which supposedly can be done, but that's at a very advanced level. That's right. A monk that's Thich Nhat Hanh. That's, somebody who devotes all their time to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that maybe they could turn off the mind for 1/60th of the time, I think is a very attainable goal. And I'm going to start proposing that to people I meet.
Oh, great. I'm glad. There's someone else. Pam, yeah, go ahead.
I think what this brings to mind for me is gratitude, is that you're really infusing gratitude for every small thing that you're involved in throughout the day. And that's one of the things I've always loved about Hasidism, is that they institutionalize that. And I could never be a Hasid, but I think their approach to life is, I find it very spiritually strengthening.
Yeah. And, look, the history of Hasidism and how we sort of ended up with Hasidism of today versus the Hasidism. I mean, essentially the Hasidism that was destroyed in the Holocaust, in that whole living culture. That's a whole other, whole other story. And in fact, I think, we in communities like EJ and Tifereth Israel, sort of, I think the first reaction of Hasidism is like ultra-Orthodox, right? Is sort of like our first thought. And in fact, the roots of Hasidism are really radical. I mean, they were radical enough that the entire established Jewish community turned out against them. And they wouldn't marry, Hasidic families. I mean, it was the only thing that healed the rift between the Hasids and the Misnagids, their opponents, was the advent of modernism and Zionism and secular, sort of Jewish life, and they all said, "Oh wow, we got bigger problems to deal with." So I think that radical nature of these early Hasidic texts, they push us in a way that I just, if you're willing to work through all of the references and all of the texts that they cite, you find some treasure, some real treasure. And that's our birthright, as Jews, is this material.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So do I have till 8:15 or till 8? What's the timing? I don't remember. Oh, you're muted, Mary.
8:15.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share, this is a little bit of more personal sharing, which is that part of why I'm sharing this particular text and this style is that, mid-pandemic, I mean, I don't know how far this pandemic, but I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 months into the pandemic, I hit a real slump in my spiritual life where I felt like I just wasn't connecting, and I was trying to do all the Zoom stuff, and I just felt like hitting a wall a little bit. And after some conversation and thinking and talking to my husband, whatever, I sort of took on this project to try and work on and translate different Hasidic texts every week or two. And wasn't super consistent with it, but what I would do is sort of translate the text and look at it in my free time. And then write a little reflection for that week and that moment about sort of how it touched me. So if it's okay with you, I'll share what I wrote. So Parshat Truma, so this is probably about a year ago that I wrote this. And this is just sort of a snapshot of where I was at and how I sort of took this in at that moment. But first, there's a great comment. I'm going to share this from Sarah Rosenthal. I mind if I read this? I think that in some ways the pandemic has almost forced mindfulness in the creation of a sanctuary in every deed. There have been so many things over the past 2 years that I would take for granted that I appreciate. During High Holidays 2020, I was thinking about all the things I would have found stressful or annoying if it were a typical year of in-person davening, and how badly I wished to be experiencing those feelings instead of the loneliness and the alienation of remote services. Wow, that's a great insight. Thank you. Yeah, I 100% have felt that, both the missing of the annoying things and the yearning for that connection, and being pushed into this mindfulness. So, all right, a lot of great comments in the chat. I'm just going to, because I only have limited time, I'll share this reflection that I wrote from a little bit ago, and then I have a few guiding questions for us, and we'll sort of wrap up. This is such a great framing for what it means to live a life of mindfulness without straying into the idea that we can be 100% mindful at every waking moment. but to be able to dedicate 1/60th, or I guess I did the math a year ago, 1.67% of every action or thought to a sacred purpose feels like an achievable goal for someone with a dedicated spiritual life and practice. I found in COVID world, this is even tougher than usual, as I feel the distraction of my screens and emails, not to mention the distraction of Ezra, who at that time was about 16 months old, and who wants to be constantly entertained and needs to be watched vigilantly. I can't say how many times we played the "What's in Your Mouth" game, which is a very fun game. But can I still find that 1/60th to uplift? And even when I'm chasing him around or cleaning up after him or doing the more mundane parts of my rabbinic work, can I find a way to say this too has some holiness in it? I love the idea that even just finding that tiny spark uplifts the whole deed or the whole thought. That we don't have to be perfect, but we do have to take, right, to take a piece of everything. And that intention transforms the entire experience of the moment. So I think I'm still in a similar place. And I think I feel a little better about my spiritual life than I did at that sort of low point about a year ago. But I think this still, for me, still holds. Beth, is your hand up or was it up from before? No, okay. Let's see some other great comments in here. I shall try to make you at home always, even if I should be locked up in a narrow cell and a cloud should drift past my small barred windows, then I shall bring you that cloud, O God. While there is still the strength in me to do so, I cannot promise you anything for tomorrow, but my intentions are good. You can see, beautiful.
That's Eddie Hillesum, the great Jewish diarist from Amsterdam during the Holocaust.
Oh, wow. Oof. Beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful reflection. And thanks to Kathy for the lovely comment, to fight against the alienation of too much Zoom and not enough presence. I will say, someone said this to me, or I read this somewhere, that I don't know what I think about it. I'm just going to throw it out there, which is, people complain about Zoom being a disembodied experience. And someone was saying, you still have a body when you're on Zoom. It's not disembodied, right? And you still do have a body. And you can still find a way to try and sit in it, to be grounded. Again, my posture on Zoom is not great, but you can still be embodied even when you're looking at a screen. It's still possible. And I think, part of my own sort of journey with Jewish mindfulness and spirituality in the pandemic was to take this, even for the things I was frustrated I had to do, like Zoom services or whatever, and to try and say, okay, I'm here. This is meaningful. There's at least a little bit of meaning, and can I sit? Can I be present? Can I really, not be checking emails or whatever, but really be focused? It's really hard. It's really hard. Okay, so I'm going to put a few of these questions in the chat. Just how can you find your 1/60th and some of your more routine or frustrating moments during your day? When can you go above and beyond and dedicate an even larger truma offering, right? And again, 1/60th is not, it's not the ceiling, it's the floor, right? Meaning, we should, 1/60th is stingy. So, we should try to do at least 1/60th, but there are other moments where, and I think you've all felt them, I'm sure, where you get to 1/50th or 1/40th, or maybe even 50% or whatever. So what are those moments when you're like, I'm going to try and dedicate 1.67%? And one of those moments where you're going to say, I'm going to try and, I'm at Shabbat morning services, and I'm going to really give it a lot more than 1.67%. And finally, and this I think is a really difficult pandemic question too, how do we respond when we can't even get to that 1.67%? Because to be real and to be honest, plenty of times where I'm not getting 1.67. So how do we sort of deal with that? So a great question from Shelley. Maybe everything that happens need not be analyzed. It may just be. I think you're right. I don't think this is saying you need to sort of perseverate and overanalyze every single action. I don't think it's saying, you need to be spinning your wheels about everything, although I'm very good at that. I think it's about being present in it. You can think about how many things we do on autopilot. I mean, again, I live in the Midwest, so I have a car, I drive places. I don't know if you guys in Manhattan know what that's about, but the route from my house to my kids' preschool, I could probably do with my eyes closed. Not that I'm going to do it, but right. And so many things that I just sort of do without really embodying it, without really being present in it, and really giving a very small percentage. So I don't think it's about overanalyzing necessarily. I think it's about inhabiting the moment and about turning it into something really, really profound. And I think if you're spinning into overanalyzing and perseverating, then that's a whole other problem, one that I am prone to myself. Other questions, other comments? I can't see everyone's faces, so if you can either just unmute if you have a comment, you can press the raise hand button, type it in the chat, or if you're feeling okay, then we can sort of.
Hey, Alex, this is
Kate.
Hey. Hi, I lost my ability to raise my hand, so you know what that would do to me.
Oh no.
But I wrote that when going through this and with the Zoom and the chatting and hearing things and being involved, and then all of a sudden when the Zoom is over, it's like total silence in my life, especially because I watched earlier, and it's learning how to deal with all of my friends are now gone, but they're not gone, but it's like silence. And then how to breathe through that one. And because that was a very different feeling. It's like so much chatter and laughing and noise and excitement and learning, and then nothing.
Then it goes.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And that's, I think that's like a real, one of the biggest challenges maybe of Jewish life is, and let me rephrase that. One of the biggest challenges that Jewish life puts to us is how do you take from those peak experiences and draw them into the everyday, right? And we have certain, methods for this. We have brachot that we can say, we have meditations we can say, we have rituals we do, we have mezuzahs on our doors, we have all sorts of things that can kind of remind us. There's a midrash that talks about we surround our homes with mitzvot, with mezuzahs, and we surround ourselves with mitzvot, with the tzitzit. Sort of always have these reminders around us that we're dedicating ourselves to a life of practice and of presence. And so, you have your experience, you have your moment, you have your class, you have your time with your friends, you have your time with your kid. And then, okay, I want to draw that into the rest of my life. And that's the work of a lifetime. I mean, that's not just something you pick up, over a class or something. That's something that you really dedicate your spiritual life to doing. At least I hope so, because if it's not, I'm way behind. So I take that as a real challenge of Jewish practice, and it's something we want to embed in everything we do, right? In our eating, in our sleeping, in our walking, in our doing, in our right. Right? When you sit, when you rise up, when you lie down, when you go out of your house, right? When you come back, that whole vision, right, is saying, we have the opportunity for each of these moments, each of these deeds, to become a little, as someone said in the chat, like a mikdash ma'at, right? A little sanctuary, a little miniature sanctuary. So I hope that those of you at BJ that, through mindfulness services and through all the things that BJ offers, that you can sort of draw on that and take from those experiences into your daily lives and not just leave it at the doors of 88th Street or 89th Street. And for folks at Tiferet, that as you hear me talking about it, teaching about it, as you hear Rabbi Hillel talking about it and teaching about it, whether those experiences are in the shul, on Zoom, whatever, that we can also sort of draw them out and take them beyond the doors of our Broad Street sanctuary and really have it come with us, right? Just like God sort of dwells with us and comes with us. We want this intentionality to come with us. So I think with that, we'll wrap up. I'll be on for a little bit longer if people want to chat or have questions, but I'll just say what a real treat, a real honor, and a real pleasure it is to come back, quote unquote, back to BJ, to see again these faces that I know and love from my time at BJ, right next to the faces I know and love from my time at Tiferet. it's a real unique and special privilege. Thanks, everybody.